The saddest farewells are the ones that look ordinary until they become the memory you spend the rest of your life trying to change. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and destiny, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us that love finds the broken. Now, back to Emily. Rain poured steadily over the towering walls of Blackstone Keep, turning the ancient stone pathways into shimmering rivers beneath the fading light of a gray autumn evening. Emily Brooks tightened the hood of her travel cloak as she stood quietly before the massive iron gates, holding a small leather bag that contained little more than a folded blanket, an old journal, and a single pressed white rose she had kept since the first spring she had spent inside the castle. Around her, guards continued changing shifts, servants hurried across the courtyard carrying baskets of firewood, and royal messengers rode through the gates without giving her more than a passing glance. The kingdom moved forward exactly as it always had, unaware that one quiet goodbye was about to change everything. Emily slowly turned her head toward the highest balcony overlooking the courtyard. Through the curtain of rain, she could just make out the familiar silhouette of Alpha King Nathan Ashford standing beside the stone railing. He had one hand resting against the weathered wall while the other held an unopened royal letter. Even from this distance, she could recognize the tired posture that months of endless responsibility had carved into his shoulders. For a brief moment, hope flickered inside her heart. Maybe he would call her name. Maybe he would run down those long marble staircases like he used to during happier days. Maybe he would ask her to stay. Instead, Nathan remained still, believing she simply needed a little space after another painful misunderstanding. He told himself tomorrow would be a better day to fix what had slowly broken between them. Tomorrow, he would apologize for allowing duty to come before love. Tomorrow, he would finally ask why the brightest smile inside the castle had quietly disappeared. Tomorrow felt so certain that he never imagined today could become their last chance. Emily closed her eyes as rain rolled gently across her pale cheeks, hiding tears she no longer wished to wipe away. She had spent countless nights convincing herself that patience could heal any distance, that love could survive silence, and that kindness would eventually overcome doubt. But some wounds were not created by cruel words. They were created by the absence of the words that mattered most. She reached into her pocket and wrapped her fingers around a small silver pendant before quietly placing it inside her bag. It no longer belonged around her neck. Not until trust returned. A cool breeze swept through the open gates, carrying the scent of wet pine trees from the distant mountains. Emily drew one slow breath, looked toward the castle one final time, and whispered so softly that only the falling rain seemed to hear, "I hope one day you understand." Then she stepped beyond the gates without looking back. High above, Nathan finally glanced toward the courtyard just in time to catch a fleeting glimpse of a lone figure disappearing into the mist beyond the castle road. A strange uneasiness settled inside his chest, but another royal advisor entered the balcony carrying urgent reports from the northern border. Nathan turned away, convinced there would be another sunrise, another conversation, and another opportunity to make everything right. Behind him, the rain continued washing over the empty road where Emily's footprints slowly disappeared beneath the falling water, carrying with them the final ordinary moment before regret would become the heaviest burden an Alpha King had ever known. 3 days earlier, Blackstone Keep had welcomed the first cool breeze of autumn, and for a little while the castle had felt less like the center of a kingdom and more like a place where ordinary happiness still existed. Golden sunlight poured through the tall windows as Emily Brooks crossed the courtyard carrying a woven basket filled with fresh herbs gathered before dawn. Every servant she passed greeted her with genuine affection because she never hurried past anyone without asking how they were doing. She remembered birthdays, family names, and even the smallest worries that others believed no one noticed. Near the royal stables, a frightened young horse refused to leave its stall after being startled by distant thunder. Stable hands exchanged worried looks, but Emily simply approached with slow, careful steps. She rested one gentle hand against the horse's neck and spoke in a quiet voice that no one else could fully hear. Within moments, the nervous animal relaxed, lowering its head until it rested peacefully beside her shoulder. The stable master smiled with relief. You always know exactly what they need, he said. Emily laughed softly. Sometimes they only need someone to stay instead of trying to force them forward. Later that morning she visited the small infirmary inside the castle walls, helping prepare warm herbal tea for elderly villagers who had traveled nearly 20 miles seeking comfort from the coming winter. She listened patiently to every story, celebrated every small improvement, and reminded each visitor that they would always be welcome inside Blackstone Keep. Children gathered around her whenever she appeared. She read stories beneath an old oak tree, tied loose ribbons back into little girls' hair, and handed fresh bread to boys who insisted they were not hungry even though their empty stomachs said otherwise. Her kindness never demanded attention. It simply became part of the air everyone breathed. High above the gardens, Nathan Ashford stood inside the council chamber reviewing reports spread across a long oak table. Trade negotiations, harvest estimates, border inspections, and endless requests from neighboring territories filled every hour of his day. Through the open balcony doors he caught sight of Emily laughing with the children below. A faint smile crossed his face before another advisor placed yet another document before him. Nathan promised himself he would join her after the meeting. Then another messenger arrived. Then another discussion began. One responsibility quietly replaced the next until the afternoon disappeared without him ever leaving the chamber. That evening, the castle gathered beneath glowing chandeliers for supper. Noble families praised the Alpha King's leadership while musicians played gentle melodies that echoed through the great hall. Emily sat beside Nathan exactly where everyone expected the Luna to sit, elegant yet almost invisible behind conversations about politics and military preparations. More than once she turned toward him, hoping to share a simple smile or a quiet thought, but every attempt was interrupted by another question from a council member or another urgent report carried into the hall. She never complained. Instead, she watched him with patient understanding, convincing herself there would always be another evening. After supper they finally walked together across the moonlit terrace overlooking the castle gardens. Cool air carried the scent of white roses blooming beneath the stone walls. Nathan noticed how pale Emily looked beneath the silver light. "You seem tired lately," he said gently. Emily met his eyes with the same reassuring smile that had comforted so many others. "It is only the season changing," she answered softly. "Do not worry about me." Nathan accepted her answer because he wanted to believe it. He never noticed the brief hesitation before she climbed the marble steps, or the quiet breath she drew after only a few moments of walking. Somewhere deep inside, Emily already understood that time was changing far more quickly than the seasons, and although the castle still glowed with warmth around them, the distance between two loving hearts had already begun growing one silent moment at a time. The following morning unfolded beneath a blanket of low gray clouds that seemed to press gently against the towers of Blackstone Keep. A cool wind carried the scent of approaching rain through every open corridor while servants whispered about unexpected visitors arriving from neighboring territories. Emily Brooks paid little attention to the excitement. She spent the early hours arranging fresh flowers inside the castle chapel before delivering baskets of herbs to the infirmary, smiling warmly at everyone she met along the way. She believed kindness should remain constant even when the world around it became uncertain. Shortly before noon, elegant carriages rolled through the castle gates carrying distinguished guests from the eastern provinces. Among them was Lady Victoria Hawthorne, a noblewoman admired for her flawless manners, graceful speeches, and remarkable ability to make everyone feel important. She greeted Emily with genuine warmth, complimented the beauty of the castle gardens, and thanked her for the generous welcome. Emily answered with sincere kindness, never imagining that the woman standing before her had arrived with ambitions far greater than friendship. Throughout the afternoon, tiny misunderstandings began appearing so quietly that no one noticed the pattern. A confidential letter intended for Nathan Ashford was somehow discovered inside a sitting room Emily had visited earlier that morning while delivering flowers. A merchant unexpectedly claimed that details from a private trade discussion had reached competitors before agreements had been signed. A valuable royal document disappeared for only a few minutes before mysteriously returning to its proper place. None of these events directly accused Emily, yet each coincidence gently nudged suspicion in the same direction. Lady Victoria never spoke harshly. Instead, she simply asked careful questions at exactly the right moments. Perhaps someone unknowingly shared more than they intended, she suggested during an afternoon conversation with several advisors. Lady Emily has such a generous heart. Sometimes generous people trust too easily. Her words sounded compassionate rather than cruel, making them far more dangerous. By evening, quiet whispers drifted through the castle halls like the first cold breeze before winter. Nathan immediately sensed the unusual atmosphere surrounding his court. Every advisor assured him that nothing serious had happened, only a handful of unfortunate coincidences requiring careful attention. Nathan refused to believe Emily could intentionally betray anyone. Still, as Alpha King, he had spent years learning that responsibility demanded questions even when the answers might be painful. After supper he found Emily arranging books inside the royal library, where warm firelight danced across endless shelves of worn leather bindings. She looked up and smiled the moment she saw him, but the smile softened as she noticed the hesitation in his eyes. Nathan wanted to speak freely, to ask whether something had troubled her, to tell her that strange rumors were spreading through the court. Instead, duty shaped his silence before love found its voice. Emily studied him for several quiet seconds, recognizing the uncertainty he was trying so carefully to hide. It was not anger that frightened her. It was doubt. Doubt had never existed between them before. She stepped closer, gently straightened the collar of his coat, and whispered, "You look exhausted." Nathan almost reached for her hand, but a firm knock echoed through the library doors. Another royal advisor entered carrying urgent reports requiring the king's immediate attention. Nathan glanced apologetically toward Emily before following the advisor into the hallway. She remained standing beside the fireplace long after the footsteps faded, watching the empty doorway with eyes filled not with resentment but with quiet sadness. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, thunder rolled softly across the darkening sky, and neither of them realized that trust had begun slipping away not because love had disappeared, but because silence had quietly taken its place. Rain began falling before sunrise, covering Blackstone Keep beneath a quiet veil of silver that softened every tower and every stone path. Inside the royal council chamber, a heavy silence settled over the long oak table as Nathan Ashford studied several documents spread before him. Individually, each report appeared harmless. Together, they painted a picture that refused to leave his thoughts. Private schedules had somehow become known outside the castle. Royal correspondence had briefly disappeared before returning to its proper place. Trusted advisors quietly questioned whether someone close to the throne had unknowingly allowed confidential information to travel beyond the palace walls. Nathan did not want to believe any of it. Every memory of Emily Brooke stood in complete opposition to the rumors surrounding her. Yet the burden of wearing a crown demanded that he seek certainty instead of comfort. Late that morning, he asked Emily to meet him inside the council chamber after the advisors had departed. When she entered, the enormous room felt strangely empty despite its towering ceilings and stained glass windows glowing beneath the gray morning light. She immediately noticed the stack of documents resting before him and the concern hidden behind his calm expression. Nathan stepped away from the table, leaving the papers untouched. "There have been questions," he said quietly. "Questions that I cannot simply ignore." Emily listened without interrupting. She had expected this moment ever since the whispers first began drifting through the castle halls. She looked into Nathan's silver-gray eyes, searching for the complete trust that had once lived there so naturally. Instead she found hesitation. It was small, almost invisible, but enough to tell her everything she needed to know. She could have explained every misunderstanding. She could have described every conversation, every missing detail, every carefully arranged coincidence. She even knew who had quietly guided suspicion toward her. But revealing the entire truth would expose promises she had made to protect others, promises she refused to break even now. Nathan took another slow breath. "Help me understand," he said gently. "Please." Emily smiled with heartbreaking tenderness, not because she felt hopeful, but because she loved him too deeply to let him carry guilt for asking. "If I answered every question today," she whispered, "would your heart truly stop doubting?" Nathan tried to answer, but no words came. The silence between them became longer than either of them intended. Emily lowered her eyes for a brief moment before reaching beneath the collar of her dress. Hanging there was the delicate silver Luna pendant Nathan had placed around her neck years earlier beneath blooming spring trees. Her fingers lingered on it with quiet affection before she carefully unclasped the chain. She stepped toward the council table and gently placed the pendant upon the polished wood. The soft metallic sound echoed through the empty chamber with unexpected weight. Nathan stared at it in disbelief. "Emily," he said, taking one hurried step forward. She raised her hand with gentle grace, stopping him before he came any closer. Tears shimmered in her blue eyes, but her voice remained steady. "The kingdom deserves a king whose heart is free from uncertainty," she said softly. "I will not ask you to choose between your duty and your doubts." Nathan reached toward her again, desperate to say something that would repair what silence had broken. Every apology remained trapped behind thoughts he could not organize quickly enough. Emily looked at him one final time, her expression filled not with anger or disappointment, but with quiet love that expected nothing in return. "I hope you find the truth," she whispered. Then she turned, walked slowly toward the great wooden doors, and disappeared into the long stone hallway beyond. Nathan remained standing beside the abandoned pendant, listening as her footsteps gradually faded until only the gentle sound of rain against the castle windows remained, never realizing that with every step she took away from him, the distance between regret and redemption was quietly beginning to grow. The morning after Emily Brooks left the council chamber, Blackstone Keep felt strangely hollow despite being as busy as ever. Servants hurried through the corridors carrying fresh linens, royal guards changed shifts beneath the towering gates, and advisors filled the great hall with discussions about trade agreements and winter preparations. Yet to Nathan Ashford, every familiar sound seemed distant, as though the castle itself had lost something it could not name. The silver Luna pendant still rested upon his desk exactly where Emily had placed it. More than once he reached toward it, only to pull his hand away before touching it. He kept telling himself there would be time to speak with her once emotions settled. He still believed she was somewhere inside the castle, quietly waiting for tomorrow. That illusion shattered shortly before noon. An elderly royal archivist requested a private audience, carrying several worn ledgers whose leather bindings had faded with age. The old man had served the royal family for decades and rarely interrupted official meetings unless something demanded immediate attention. Without speaking, he carefully opened the oldest ledger beside the newer records already sitting on Nathan's desk. Page after page revealed tiny alterations hidden beneath replacement parchment. Dates had been changed. Delivery records had been rewritten. Visitor logs had been copied incorrectly. Individually they appeared insignificant. Together they exposed a deliberate effort to reshape the truth. Nathan leaned forward as his heartbeat steadily quickened. Every suspicious coincidence surrounding Emily had been carefully manufactured long before anyone noticed. Before either man could speak again, another palace attendant hurried into the chamber carrying a sealed envelope recently discovered behind a cabinet inside the royal correspondence room. The letter had never reached its intended recipient. Nathan immediately recognized Emily's graceful handwriting. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper. The message contained nothing about politics or accusations. Instead, Emily had written a quiet reminder about several struggling farming families living near the Eastern Valley. She asked that additional blankets and food be delivered before the first heavy snowfall. At the bottom she had added a single handwritten sentence. "I know you carry the weight of every family in this kingdom, so please allow me to quietly carry a little of yours." Nathan closed his eyes as those simple words settled heavily inside his heart. She had never stopped standing beside him. She had simply loved him in ways so gentle that he had begun taking them for granted. The archivist slowly placed another document before him. This one identified the chain of altered records leading back to Lady Victoria Hawthorne's household staff. The carefully arranged misunderstandings had not been accidents at all. They had been planned with extraordinary patience. Nathan rose from his chair so quickly that it slid backward across the stone floor. Every delayed conversation, every unanswered smile, every quiet hesitation suddenly returned with painful clarity. He rushed through the castle corridors toward Emily's chambers without waiting for an escort. When he opened the door, the room stood perfectly neat beneath soft afternoon light streaming through the windows. The shelves had been emptied of her journals. Her traveling cloak was gone. Only a neatly folded blanket remained across the chair where she used to spend quiet evenings reading beside the window. An elderly housekeeper quietly appeared in the doorway, lowering her eyes with gentle sadness. She departed before sunrise, the woman whispered. She thanked every servant personally. She smiled at everyone before she walked through the gates. Nathan stood frozen inside the silent room, realizing that while he had been searching for certainty inside official documents, the woman who had always believed in him had already begun walking away, carrying nothing except her memories, her kindness, and a goodbye he had never realized was truly meant to last. Nathan Ashford left Blackstone Keep before the sun rose above the eastern hills, refusing the royal carriage and choosing instead the narrow mountain roads Emily Brooks had always preferred whenever she wanted to escape the endless demands of court life. A handful of trusted guards followed several hundred yards behind, respecting the silence that surrounded their king. Cool autumn air carried the scent of pine and damp earth as his horse climbed winding trails leading toward the northern villages. Every passing mile seemed to whisper another memory he had overlooked while believing there would always be more time. The first village greeted him with the warm aroma of fresh bread drifting from a small family bakery. Nathan stepped inside and asked only one question. "Have you seen Emily Brooks?" The elderly baker smiled with quiet recognition before pointing toward a weathered wooden bench beneath a maple tree outside the shop. "She was here yesterday morning," the woman said gently. "She bought every loaf I baked and asked me to give them to families preparing for winter. She said kindness lasts longer when it keeps moving." Nathan thanked her and stood beside the empty bench for a long moment. Imagining Emily sitting there beneath falling leaves, smiling at strangers who would probably never know her name. He continued north as golden afternoon light spread across rolling hills. At a small schoolhouse nearly 20 miles farther along the valley, the village teacher welcomed him with surprise. Before Nathan could ask another question, she carried out a wooden crate filled with beautifully bound storybooks. "Lady Emily delivered these herself," she explained. "She told the children that courage begins with believing a better ending is always possible." Nathan carefully touched the worn cover of one book before quietly continuing his journey. Everywhere he traveled, someone remembered Emily for a different reason. An elderly couple spoke of the fence she repaired before sunrise after a powerful storm. A young widow described how Emily had quietly paid for winter firewood without leaving her name. A shepherd smiled while recalling the afternoon she patiently helped frightened lambs cross a flooded stream instead of continuing her own journey. Nathan slowly realized he was no longer searching only for the woman he loved. He was following countless acts of compassion she had scattered across the kingdom without expecting recognition. As evening approached, the winding road led him to a peaceful chapel overlooking a crystal lake surrounded by towering evergreen trees. The aging caretaker immediately recognized Emily's description. "She rested here this morning," he said softly. "She watched the sunrise across the water for nearly an hour. She looked tired, but peaceful." Nathan stepped inside the small chapel where colorful light from stained glass windows rested gently across old wooden floors. Near the final pew he noticed a single pressed white rose carefully placed between the pages of a worn hymn book. He recognized it instantly. It matched the flower Emily had once kept inside her journal at Blackstone Keep. He lifted it with trembling hands, realizing she had left behind another quiet piece of herself without expecting anyone to notice. Outside, gentle ripples crossed the still lake while the evening breeze carried fallen leaves across the narrow path leading farther into the mountains. One of Nathan's guards approached with a map marked by villagers who had seen Emily continue north only a few hours earlier. Nathan looked toward the distant peaks glowing beneath the fading sunset and understood with growing sorrow that every stop along the way revealed not how far she had traveled, but how deeply she had touched the lives of everyone she met. For the first time since becoming Alpha King, he knew that the greatest distance he had ever created was not measured in miles, but in all the quiet moments he had allowed duty to steal from the woman who had never once stopped believing in him. The first light of dawn touched the northern mountains as Nathan Ashford continued climbing the winding trail beyond the quiet lakeside chapel. Frost covered the narrow path, sparkling beneath pale sunlight while towering pine trees stood motionless against the crisp autumn sky. Every mile carried him farther from Blackstone Keep and closer to the truth he had spent far too long overlooking. The map given to him by the village caretaker ended near a secluded valley where only a handful of travelers ever passed. At the edge of the trail stood a small stone cottage surrounded by wild lavender, medicinal herbs, and weathered wooden fences. Thin smoke drifted peacefully from the chimney. Before Nathan reached the front door, an elderly woman stepped outside as though she had already expected someone to arrive. Her silver hair rested beneath a knitted shawl, and her gentle eyes studied the weary Alpha King with quiet understanding rather than surprise. "I hoped you would come," she said softly. Nathan lowered his head respectfully. "Have you seen Emily Brooks?" The woman nodded and invited him inside. The cottage was warm despite the cool mountain air. Shelves filled with dried herbs lined the walls beside old family photographs and carefully polished wooden furniture. Resting upon a small table near the window lay a familiar leather journal. Nathan recognized it immediately. Emily had carried it everywhere for years, quietly writing during peaceful evenings when the castle had finally grown silent. The elderly woman carefully placed the journal into his hands. "She asked me to keep this safe until someone came searching with love instead of suspicion," she explained. Nathan slowly opened the worn cover. The earliest pages contained simple memories. Spring flowers blooming inside the castle gardens. Children's laughter echoing through the courtyard. Quiet walks beneath moonlit skies beside the man she loved. Every page reflected gratitude rather than complaint. As he continued reading, the entries gradually revealed a hidden truth Emily had never shared. For nearly a year she had secretly traveled to the ancient moon sanctuary hidden deep within the northern mountains. Each visit strengthened the protective blessing surrounding Blackstone Keep, shielding the kingdom from an old spiritual burden that quietly threatened the land. The blessing demanded a personal sacrifice. Every time Emily renewed it, she surrendered a little of her own strength so Nathan would never have to carry that responsibility himself. She never wrote about suffering. Instead, every entry repeated the same hope in different words. "If Nathan can sleep peacefully, then today was a beautiful day." Another page contained pressed white rose petals collected from the castle gardens. Beside them she had written, "Love is not proven by grand promises. Sometimes it is proven by the quiet things another person never has to worry about." Nathan's vision blurred as tears filled his silver-gray eyes. Every moment she had looked tired. Every smile she had offered despite her growing exhaustion. Every gentle reassurance that the changing season was making her weary. Suddenly every forgotten detail fit together with heartbreaking clarity. Near the final pages, Emily's handwriting appeared slightly weaker but remained beautifully steady. "If he ever reads this," she wrote, "please remind him that I never wanted him to blame himself. I only wanted him to remember that being a great king never required carrying every burden alone." Nathan carefully closed the journal against his chest as silence filled the little cottage. The elderly woman looked toward the snow-covered mountains beyond the window before speaking again. She left. Before sunrise, she whispered. She continued toward the old cabin overlooking the eastern ridge. She smiled before leaving and said that if destiny was kind, your paths would cross again. Nathan tightened his grip on the journal and hurried back toward the waiting trail, finally understanding that the greatest act of love Emily had ever given him had been hidden inside ordinary days he had mistaken for ordinary moments, and with every passing hour he feared that the chance to tell her he finally understood was slipping farther beyond his reach. Snow began falling gently as Nathan Ashford followed the narrow trail climbing toward the eastern ridge described by the elderly woman. The world around him grew quieter with every step. Towering pine trees stood beneath blankets of fresh white snow while the fading afternoon sun painted the mountain peaks with soft shades of gold. Clutched securely against his chest, Emily Brooks's journal felt heavier than any royal decree he had ever carried. Every page had revealed a love so patient and selfless that it left him questioning how he had failed to recognize it while she stood beside him every single day. At the top of the ridge, a small wooden cabin overlooked a peaceful valley stretching endlessly beneath the winter sky. Thin wisps of smoke drifted from the stone chimney, and warm light glowed softly through a single window. Nathan stopped only long enough to steady his breathing before quietly walking through the small wooden gate. Sitting on an old bench outside the cabin was Emily. She wore the same pale blue dress beneath a warm wool shawl, her chestnut hair moving gently with the mountain breeze as snowflakes settled softly around her. She looked peaceful, though noticeably more tired than he remembered. For a brief moment neither of them spoke. Emily slowly lifted her eyes and found Nathan standing only a few steps away. Surprise crossed her face before fading into the same gentle smile that had welcomed countless strangers throughout her life. "You found me," she whispered. Nathan crossed the snowy yard without hesitation. When he finally stood before her, every carefully rehearsed sentence disappeared. Instead, he slowly knelt in the snow and looked into her blue eyes, unable to hide the tears gathering there. "I finally know the truth," he said quietly. "I read every page. I saw every sacrifice you hid from me. I spent so long believing I was protecting this kingdom that I never realized you were protecting both the kingdom and me." Emily reached out with quiet tenderness, brushing a melting snowflake from his dark hair. "You carried more responsibility than anyone should ever have to carry," she answered softly. "I only wanted to make your path a little lighter." Nathan gently took both of her hands into his own. They felt cool from the mountain air, yet they still carried the same quiet warmth he remembered from countless evenings walking beside her through the castle gardens. "I should have trusted you before I trusted fear," he whispered. "I should have listened before silence became stronger than love. I cannot change what happened, but if there is still time, I want every tomorrow to begin differently." Emily lowered her eyes for a moment before looking back at him. Tears rested quietly along her lashes, yet her smile never disappeared. "Nathan," she said gently, "love was never something you lost because you made a mistake. Love only asks whether we are willing to grow after we recognize it." Nathan carefully removed the silver Luna pendant from inside his coat. Snow reflected softly across its polished surface as he placed it into her hands. "Come home with me," he said. "Not because the kingdom needs its Luna, but because I need the woman who has always been my home." Emily looked down at the pendant before closing her fingers around it. The mountain wind carried a peaceful silence across the valley as the final light of day settled over the snow-covered trees. She rested her forehead gently against his and closed her eyes. "I never stopped believing in you," she whispered. "I only hoped one day you would believe that you did not have to face every burden alone." Nathan closed his eyes as well, holding her hands with quiet gratitude while the first evening stars slowly appeared above the mountains, silently promising himself that if destiny granted them another sunrise together, he would never again allow duty to speak louder than the love that had been waiting faithfully beside him all along. Several months later, spring returned to the northern kingdom with gentle rain and fields filled with white blossoms stretching beyond the walls of Blackstone Keep. The castle looked the same from a distance, yet everything inside had quietly changed. Nathan Ashford no longer began each morning inside the council chamber surrounded by endless reports. Instead, he walked through the gardens before sunrise, greeting gardeners, stable hands, and kitchen workers by name, remembering the simple lesson Emily Brooks had taught him without ever asking him to learn it. A kingdom was never strengthened by fear alone. It flourished when every person believed they mattered. Emily stood beside him once again, wearing the silver Luna pendant around her neck, not because tradition demanded it, but because trust had found its way home. Freed from the quiet burden she had carried for so long, her strength gradually returned with each passing season. The peaceful months spent resting in the mountain cabin, away from endless responsibility, had allowed both her heart and body to recover little by little. She smiled more easily now, and whenever Nathan noticed that familiar light returning to her blue eyes, gratitude filled his own. Together they transformed Blackstone Keep into a place where every voice could be heard. The great council hall welcomed village elders, teachers, healers, and craftsmen alongside noble families. Nathan listened before making decisions, often asking the same simple question Emily had asked throughout her life. How will this help the people who need us most? The answer shaped every choice that followed. The castle gardens expanded beyond the outer walls so children from nearby villages could play among the white roses Emily loved. The infirmary received new supplies before every winter. Schools opened across the northern territories, carrying books, music, and hope to communities that had once been forgotten. People soon noticed that their Alpha King smiled more often, laughed more freely, and no longer carried every burden alone. Lady Victoria Hawthorne quietly confessed her deception before leaving the kingdom in peaceful exile, and the altered records remained preserved within the royal archives as a reminder that suspicion should never replace truth. Nathan insisted they never erase that chapter of history because forgetting mistakes often invited them to return. One quiet evening, as golden sunlight settled across the familiar stone paths of the castle gardens, Nathan and Emily walked beneath blooming trees exactly as they had dreamed of doing during happier days long ago. Their hands remained gently intertwined while a soft breeze carried the fragrance of white roses through the warm spring air. Nathan stopped beside the oldest rose bush in the garden and looked toward the woman who had changed not only his life but the heart of an entire kingdom. I used to believe being a great king meant never making mistakes, he said softly. Emily smiled with the same gentle kindness that had first captured his heart. The greatest leaders are not remembered because they were perfect, she answered. They are remembered because they never stopped becoming better. Nathan leaned forward and rested his forehead gently against hers as the evening sun painted the castle walls with golden light. Around them, children laughed in the gardens, families gathered beneath flowering trees, and the kingdom breathed with quiet peace. Looking across the life they had rebuilt together, Nathan finally understood that castles could be repaired, traditions could change, and trust could grow stronger after being broken if people chose humility over pride. From that day forward, whenever visitors asked why the Northern Kingdom had become known as the happiest land beneath the mountain skies, the answer was always the same. Its Alpha King had learned that the strongest crown was never forged from power alone, but from the courage to cherish the heart that chose to walk beside him before tomorrow had the chance to become another regret.